One of the things we tried to constantly get over, not only during the referendum, but really since then, was this idea that, look, if you want to be global Britain and you want to do trade deals with other countries, they're not exactly just going to roll over and give you everything, you want. And ultimately, they are going to argue for their own national interests as well. And in some cases, we may find that, trying to export, certain things, as we are about to find out, as you can probably see from the title, some countries are going to just absolutely flatly reject that because they do not want imports to affect, their own industry, and especially tariffs, because tariffs are the big one. Because you can say, right, we want to make sure that, in this case, the cheese industry, we want to protect our own homegrown cheese industry. So we are going to raise tariffs on, imports of cheese by X number of amount. And this makes it, in some cases, impossible or next to impossible for cheesemakers to import their stuff because the cost is so expensive. It's just not worth the cost. It's impossible. And if you do get your cheese in, you would have to sell it at such higher price that your then cheese in their market is just not competitive and it won't sell. We tried to explain this time and time again, but trying to explain, concepts like foreign trade, etc., they are really quite complicated to try and, tell people. But of course, saying that we're going to become global Britain, we're going to become this magnificent trading nation, isn't it all going to be, quote, wonderful? It unfortunately sold better, and it went down more easy, shall we say, with the public, who went, well, actually, maybe we can trade, with these other countries more. Of course, ignoring many of the experts who were saying, well, actually, that's not going to be the case. And lo and behold, that's turned out not to be the case, because guess what? As Canada said today, hard cheese. And this, of course, also goes to things like, the CCTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because aren't we in the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Isn't Canada in this? Can't we do something about this? Well, actually, no, we can't. So yeah, this is just a clear example of what Brexit, what the reality is. We are going to face things like this, and it is going to end up negatively affecting British, in this case, British cheesemakers. So let's find out what's been going on here. But before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me a coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. And of course, there is the Pony Club down below as well. And of course, the YouTube thank you button as well. So let's find out what happened here. So this was over in The Guardian with the title of Hard Cheese. Canada rejects British attempt to secure tariff-free exports. So, a priceless opportunity to sell more affordable, high-quality cheese to Canada was one of the many Brexit boons that Boris Johnson championed with his customary blather as Prime Minister. A bespoke UK-Canada trade deal was going to open up the Canadian market to Cheddar, Stilton, and Wensleydale in a way that had never been possible under the trade agreement struck between the EU and Canada. But after a meeting in recent days between the British cheesemakers and the UK government's negotiating team, there is a whiff to Johnson's boasts that would put a stinking bishop to shame. Not only are the British negotiators getting nowhere fast on the terms of a comprehensive trade deal with Canada, but the UK's attempts to at least extend the rollover of the EU terms on cheese exports have been squarely rejected by the Canadian counterparts. And of course, you may remember that back when Liz Truss was International Trade Secretary, she was celebrating all these, quote, trade deals she was doing. And as we said at the time, no, 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 no. That's not a trade deal. That's a rollover deal, meaning that for the time being, Canada is going to continue trading with us as if we were in the EU. And as we said, there will just come a point where Canada will just go, we're not continuing on those terms anymore. And now you're getting to a point where British negotiations, they've completely fallen apart with America. It doesn't seem that British negotiators are getting anywhere with Canada. They're going nowhere with the Indian trade deal either. So it looks like this mountainous, prosperity-laden global Britain has been falling to pieces. So the previous side agreement, known as, quote, the cheese letters, of maintaining a healthy tariff-free export quota on cheese will come to an end on the 31st of December without anything tasty to replace it, the government has now conceded. The British cheese exports from the 1st of January will default to then the non-EU tariff-free quota of about 95% is already spoken for by the Norwegian and Swiss producers, amongst others. So now, not only are we competing with EU countries on this, because they'll be getting there through their negotiations, but now, when they have an export quota, and 95% of that is taken up by Norwegian and Swiss producers. How are we going to break into this? What's the magnificent strategy we are going to adopt on this? That it's just not going to work. We said before, whenever you enter into things like this, if you want to sell into a market, then ultimately you have to sort of give something back. It is a give and take relationship. This idea of, when we're in the EU, that was all this sort of, pooled sovereignty, that we'd all agreed to do this and then just go, whoa, well, actually, we're not going to sort of fully agree to all this. We're going to go out and do all these other trade deals, which, are kind of like the trade deals other countries want to do of, you give up a bit of sovereignty, we'll give a bit of our sovereignty, we'll all, have a quote, a good time. Yeah, not really happened, has it? So, imports to Canada that are now falling outside that quota will end up being slapped with a 245% duty. Yeah. I said at the beginning about cheese imports being impossible to do? Yeah. Why is a British company that is now going to face a 245% duty to export their cheese to Canada? Why are they even going to bother? That is just so cost prohibitive that it's just not even worth sending your cheese to Canada. So this will make them just unaffordable, or even the most dedicated fan of artisanal cheese. After months of trying to reassure the words from the Trade Secretary, Kimmy Badenoch, about trying to work on a deal, the government is now advising cheese exporters to prepare for the worst. David Larian, the managing director of Coombe Castle International, based in Wiltshire, has said that exports to Canada account for over a third of its turnover. Just think about that. Now, this guy, a third of his turnover goes to Canada with that, that mark in Canada. He's now going to be facing 245% duties. That's impossible. That trade stops almost overnight, completely. But anyway, this is what he had to say. He said, "We have been trading for over 40 years with our partner in Canada, but it is now all at risk. The negotiating team's estimations is that we have reached the end of the road on the cheese extension letters. The door remains open, but the team's estimation is that Canada just doesn't want a deal on cheese now." Coombe Castle, which received the King's Award for Enterprise International Trade back in April of 2023, has already had to set up a Dutch company in order to sell into the EU and is now paying taxes in the Netherlands. Brexit has not brought any opportunities. No good has come of it, Laverne said. And again, this is what we have seen increasingly happen. You've seen British companies that want to continue trading with the EU going to have to set up, in the EU. And then what happens? Those taxes that would normally go into the British, treasury, instead they get paid to the Netherlands instead. It's not rocket science that this was obviously going to happen, because we were telling people for years this was going to happen. So other well-known cheesemakers are also affected by the government's failure to strike a deal. These include Neil's Dairy Yard, the Snowdonian Cheese Company, and a 245% on duty on cheese exports would add roughly an extra £50 cost to every kilogram of cheese. Gareth Torres, Labour's shadow trade minister, has said the government was pricing British products out of the global stage, saying it is unacceptable that British cheese exporters are now facing unfair price hikes because the government is distracted with its own endless chaos and may well be now wondering why on earth ministers agreed to this cliff edges in the UK-Canada trade agreement in the first place. This is just the latest in a series of missteps on trade. The government has given away far too much for far too little in trade negotiations and have now axed support to businesses to try and capitalize on these trade deals, and it now seems unable to actually stop new tariffs hitting top British exporters. Well, this is just the reality. This is just the reality of of trade. Not every country is just going to instantly want to do a trade deal with you, because they know what that means to their own home market. And as we've always said, time and time again, eventually you will start to see businesses just, I think, start to really turn around en masse. And as the cheese said there, the cheesemaker, what was his quote? Brexit has brought hasn't brought any opportunities, and the outcome has been good for no one. How long before British companies actually start really turning around and going, yeah, okay, Brexit's the problem? Because this is why we ended up joining the EU in the first place. It was UK businesses saying, we want in the EU, we want in the or at least in the European Common Market, as it was back then, the ECC, which obviously became the EU. We want in that. How long before that becomes it? Before that becomes the overwhelming cry? I think we are getting to that point slowly. And of course, as we said, next Parliament, there's going to be a lot less Brexiteers. So we might actually be able to have proper conversations about Brexit in Parliament and not get them, sidelined like we have for quite a while now. But anyway, it continues with this. So UK exporters have shipped over £18.7 million worth of cheese to Canada in 2022. And of course, during the negotiations over this wider trade deal, the Canadian government has been pushing for the British government to lower its food standards in relation to beef exports, but the UK has refused to comply. So here you have the Canadian government saying, your food standards are too high. We want you to lower them. Again, why should we? We have, and not only us in the UK, but Europe has some of the best food standards in the world. Why on earth should we lower them? And you can tell why the government has not wanted to lower them to Canada. Because obviously, if you lower them to one trade deal, well, now you have to lower them for a whole other range of trade deals. And then all of a sudden, what happens to UK farmers who are now having to comply with higher regulations, trying to compete with all these lower cost, imports that not following those regulations, and they can outproduce or underproduce, or even undercut the price of, UK people here. Turns out being in the EU, being in the single market was actually really good for a whole wide range of British companies and businesses. So let's finish this off then. So some Canadian buyers have now been stockpiling British cheese in the run up to the deadline, but Canadian cheesemongers are expecting to run out by spring. William Brain, the head of the trade policy for the British Chamber of Commerce, said it has been a worrying festive period for UK manufacturers and exporters, and of cheese and dairy products now to Canada. The Department for International Business and Trade said the UK has a right to access Canada's dairy market at the WTO. And we are in constant discussion with dairy farmers and producers about the potential changes at the end of the year, including ensuring that they have all the information that they need to now prepare. And yeah, trading on WTO terms is not the best. Not only that, you can't even bring a case to the WTO, mostly because of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump held up appointing any judges to the WTO. So the idea that the WTO is this amazing arbitrator and it's okay, it's fine because we can trade on WTO terms. No, Canada already has, we will only accept this amount of, exported cheese. 95% of it is already taken up, which essentially means good luck. Once again, Brexiteers never understood how international trade works, and Brexiteers crowing about how good, it's okay, we can just trade on WTO terms, don't understand what they were talking about, or even what they're talking about now. But anyway, they finish off with this. We will also try to continue talks with Canada about this issue, trying to emphasize that UK exports benefit businesses on both sides of the Atlantics, and demand in Canada for British cheese is on the rise, with exports up 11% this year. I expect that to drop. If there is that's going to drop. I wouldn't be surprised if that gets picked up by another different kind of cheese. But that's reality. And even if there is a demand in Canada for British cheese, Canadian cheese manufacturers aren't going to do that. Ultimately, I would not be surprised if you saw Canadian cheese manufacturers actually start to produce things like Wensleydale cheese or many other, shall we say, area-specific cheeses we have in the UK over in Canada, because now we're out of the EU naming, of course, regulations, because obviously if you, let's say you produce cheese in Wensleydale, then it can only be called Wensleydale cheese if it was made in Wensleydale. Hence why they say, champagne can only come from Champagne, otherwise it's just sparkling wine. So this is going to have huge consequences, because now, if you are a British cheese fan, then now you have to ask the question, which is the right Wensleydale cheese? And of course, Canadian cheese manufacturers are going to take advantage of this. They'll say, oh yes, British-made Wensleydale cheese. Meanwhile, on the back, it says, made in Canada. We warn people about this, and I don't think this is going to get any better. I don't think this is going to be any better at all. We know that they want us to drastically lower our food standards and regulations, and as we've said, if you lower them for one person in the group of trade deals, well, now you have to start lowering them for everyone else, because those are WTO rules. So, it's not going to be good. As we've said before, British cheese manufacturers going to have an even more harder time, because you've got that guy who's what was it? A third of his what was it? Where is his yeah, yeah, a third of his turnover was based on Canadian trade. Well, that now means he probably loses a third of his business. And he's going to have to go out and try and find other markets to sell his cheese into. That's not going to be easy. That is going to be very, very hard. If you have ever been involved in trying to sell, products to a different market, it's incredibly hard to do. 1% getting 1% market share in in another country is considered to be an amazing feat. That's how difficult it is. So bad news, and of course, bad news Christmas then for British cheese manufacturers. And of course, I don't know if anyone has told Liz Truss, because after all, she was a big fan of the cheese and pork markets. But of course, as always, hope you all have a very merry Festivus period. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time. Please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there's links to the Patreon page, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club, and etc. down below as well. So until then, we'll see you all next time.